Hello, small business leaders, innovators, and visionaries. Welcome to the podcast, Tech Stack, Inside the Innovation Engine with Fast Company. I'm your host, Roshana Bide, Fast Company Custom Studio Moderator. We are thrilled to have you with us today because the AI revolution is here, and winning in this new era depends on how you manage, protect, and unleash your data. In this conversation with Amy Lenander, EVP and Chief Data Officer from Capital One, we'll dive into the latest trends, toughest challenges, and the cultural shifts that make data work for everyone. This dynamic conversation wouldn't be possible without the incredible support of our partner, Capital One. We are thrilled now to welcome our guest, Amy Lenander, into the studio. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
It's great to have you, Amy. And I have known Capital One for years as being a data-first, data-driven organization. And you've had a great career with them over 2 decades. So let me ask you first, is that accurate? Has it always been this way? Has Capital One been a data-driven organization? What's the journey been and how you're investing in data today?
From the very beginning, Capital One was data-driven. It was actually the founding idea of Capital One was the idea that you should use data and analytics to come up with better credit card products. So at the time, credit cards pretty much had the same terms for everyone, like the same APR, the same credit limit. They were only given to people with really good credit. And our founders looked and said, like, there's got to be a better way if only we can differentiate the people who are, going to be lower risk or higher risk or more likely to use the card or less likely to use the card. Like we could actually give better products to better customers that better fit their needs. The way to do that is through data. So it is literally the thing that the company was founded on and still very much permeates our culture today. The thing that's changed, of course, over that time frame is how we use data. So at the start of Capital One, it was really innovative to use a really simple regression model and Excel spreadsheets to do the analysis that we're talking about, to ultimately send people different offers in direct mail. But as time has evolved, we've of course evolved how we use data as a company. Now we're using ML and AI models. We're delivering different differential experiences in real time to customers in mobile apps and the internet and text messaging. It's basically the same idea, but like amped way up as technology has evolved.
Yeah, so the tech has evolved, and yet from the get-go, it sounds like it's been part of the ethos of Capital One from day one, as you've said. That feels to me a lot like a cultural necessity, a cultural norm. Can you talk about the role of culture in becoming and sustaining as a data-driven organization? How do you, as Chief Data Officer, foster that kind of culture?
I foster that culture, but I think the magic is everyone at Capital One, all the leaders really foster that culture of what it means to be data-driven. And what that looks like inside Capital One is really integrating being data-driven into everything we do and how we operate. So our business leaders at Capital One are most often analysts first. The way that they make business decisions is looking for data and analyzing it to figure out what the data tells us about what the right decision should be. We often approach it sort of like a scientist would with the scientific method. Like you come up with a hypothesis of this is what I think is going on, and then you test it with experiments or with data. You've introduced me as the Chief Data Officer, which I am, but most of my career at Capital One, like 19 years worth of career at Capital One, was in those roles in the business where I started as an analyst, owning a little piece of the business and doing analysis to figure out what the right business strategy was. My roles in my career grew over time to do that at a bigger scale, leading whole businesses as time went on. For me, that speaks to the way we operate. Like it truly is the people doing analysis who actually figure out what the business strategy should be.
I would have previously assumed that a lot of the data that supports, let's say, decision making comes just from the top, but just you've articulated it, Amy, as though it's everybody, including the analysts. Can you talk about the data strategy, how you've built a well-managed strategy that can support decision making in your company in Capital One?
We love being data-driven at Capital One, obviously. But the key, like you said, well-managed data strategy, you can only be truly data-driven if you can trust the data on which you're basing decisions. So when we talk about what it means to have a well-managed data strategy to support decision-making, it really means making it so that we can trust the data that we're using to make those really important decisions. Because at Capital One, we're a financial institution. We are dealing with the financial lives of 100 million customers. And that means we don't have a lot of margin for error. Like, our data needs to be right if we're going to make those sorts of decisions on our data. So it really means that we have a high bar for the quality of our data. We need to build out a data strategy so that we can trust our data. So what does that look like? First, it's about knowing the data you have, having it well labeled, having good metadata with full and accurate descriptions. It's ideally standardizing the data. It's easier to find and to link across the company, protecting sensitive data. And really importantly, you should have monitoring to know if something goes wrong with your data upstream, so that you can tell the people downstream that something might be wrong with the data, and therefore you shouldn't trust it in that moment. That's a really hard thing to get to, if you try to do that all manually. So especially at the volume of data we have, and as a very data-driven company, we have lots and lots of data. So the way that we've approached building out a well-managed data strategy is to look to automate as much of that as possible through our technology and through our platforms.
Is your approach at Capital One to protect data and manage data, is that something that other companies can also be thinking about and learning from?
I think so. Lots of companies have cybersecurity programs, and of course, it's an area we really deeply invest in. One of the things I think other companies can particularly learn from us on is one of the innovative ways that we protect data is through tokenization. I think people sometimes use that term to mean all sorts of things, but what I'm talking about when I say tokenization is replacing real data with a token that preserves the format. It's sort of like an advanced form of encryption, but what it does is it preserves the format of the underlying data, which means that you can still use it like you would if it were data in the clear. So instead of having a social security number, you'd have the same number of characters as the token that you would have no matter where you use that specific social security number, which enables you to actually do analysis and use the data as if knowing that number is that number, but not being able to see it, so that you protect the customer's privacy and just make it a lot safer in case of any sort of breach.
Yeah, well, coming from banking, I imagine that that's a great leadership way for you to help other companies also see how they can protect their data. Tokenization. I also really want to ask you about AI, because when I think of AI challenges, data always comes up, privacy protection. Talk about your data strategy overall. How does it influence your approach to AI?
Everyone is using AI right now. Everyone's experimenting with it, trying to figure it out. But there are differences in the way that companies use AI. So lots of companies are trying to use off-the-shelf models because there's so many great models available right now. And they're trying to come up with their own prompts so that they can get that model to do what they want it to. And that can get you a lot of good automation and innovation. But the thing that's different in how we've thought about our data strategy to support AI, we really want to build a data ecosystem that can serve as a foundation for lots of data uses across the company. We talked about having high quality, trustworthy data being really necessary for decision making. So what we're trying to do is make high volumes of our data available and trustworthy and easy for use. And what that means in terms of AI is that our approach to AI doesn't just need to be prompting these off-the-shelf models, but it can also mean building our own models with our own data. And that's where the real power comes from, when we can build our own models using data that only we have access to. To be able to do that effectively, you need a huge volume of data. Our data strategy is really about trying to get the data we have available for use broadly by AI models that we might have now and AI models that we might want to build in the future.
Can you look a little bit outward for us then? What are some mistakes that you might be anticipating or seeing companies make in how they use or manage data for AI? How can they avoid any of those pitfalls or mistakes?
The one that I see the most right now is assuming that AI is going to make sense of messy data, to sort of ignore the fact that your data is messy and just say like, oh, AI is so great, it'll do great. And the thing with AI is it will give you an answer. It doesn't tell you this is based on data that was messy.
Mm-hmm.
So what ends up happening is just that the output of those AI models isn't as good if the data isn't as good, because there's really no substitute for having really trustworthy, clean data as an input to your AI. One of the things that I've talked with our data scientists about is, like, would you rather have really great AI tools and models and things, but only okay data? Or would you rather have really great data and just like okay AI? And even though these are the data scientists, like the people actually building the AI, they will always say, like, give me the great data, because there's so much more power in having great data.
I love it. I come from the old school world of ERP, so master data, supplier data. That's always been at the forefront. And you've kind of painted a picture, Amy, about bringing us into the future with AI. I'd love to ask you even further more into the future, what changes you foresee in companies, how they'll manage and use data for AI in the future.
Yeah, lots of companies today, I think the way that they think about AI is they start with the AI. They say, like, this is the thing I want to achieve with my AI model or tool, my agent. And then they work back to, like, what is the data that they need to make that happen? I think what will happen more and more over time is that companies will realize that they need to just be paying more attention to the data to start before they even talk about, like, what AI model they want to build and what the techniques are to build the AI. They'll start with, what is the data that I need and how do I know that I can trust this data and that it's appropriate for this use? I think then what will happen is companies will have more and more focus on generating their own data and thinking about, like, what is the data that only they have, their proprietary data that they can build out, sort of like a strategic reserve for their own company, so that they can use that to power the AI models that they want to build over time.
Does the future excite you?
Yes. I mean, this is one of the most exciting times to be alive when it comes to how fast technology is advancing.
And Amy, you have had an incredible career at Capital One in a variety of functions. How did you find yourself in the role of Chief Data Officer?
It's a great question, because if you'd asked me a few years ago, did I think I was going to be a chief data officer in my future? It was not a thing that I was contemplating, because all of my career up until that point had been leading businesses or parts of businesses at Capital One, which I really love doing because I'm looking at how we deliver great products to our customers. But then I was asked about 3 years ago if I would consider leading our enterprise data teams. This was before we even called it the chief data officer. They said, like, hey, would you lead these teams and basically figure out how we should manage data at Capital One? My team is mostly people who are building our data platforms. The team before I stepped in had really thought of themselves as the team, like, focused on building data platforms to serve the company. But really the change that we needed was to have someone centrally thinking about how we should manage data across the company, how we should drive our data strategy through the whole company. And the reason that was so important at this point in time is a few years ago, we had completed our journey to the cloud. It was a big move for Capital One to move the whole company basically to the cloud. Very, very few companies have pulled that off over time, and we did it with a whole bank, which is great. But that meant we had to rebuild all the ways that we operate in the cloud, including building out our data ecosystem. You can do so much more in the cloud than you could not in the cloud, because you can have so much more data, so much more computing power. So what we realized is we really needed a central effort across the company to drive that strategy throughout the company, which largely involves building these central platforms, getting everyone to use central capabilities so that our data can be used and be interoperable across the company. So here I am, Chief Data Officer, even though, that wasn't what I was planning, but it's been so helpful at Capital One to have that experience in the business to really understand what's most important to business leaders in our company and therefore what I need to deliver for them.
Amy, what's a big insight or learning from Capital One's data journey, your data journey, that could benefit other organizations?
The biggest thing we've realized is the importance of building a strong foundation for data and a data ecosystem. The foundation is never like the flashy thing that everyone's so excited about. But I really believe, and we believe at Capital One, that if we're able to build that strong foundation, that's what's going to enable innovation across the company. And it's going to really propel us over time to be able to do so much more than we can today. The thing I would encourage other companies to think about is really how do you actually invest in that foundation? Because it's such a hard thing to do. I talk with so many companies that say, like, it's really easy to get support for the flashy thing, the cool AI model that's going to have this cool impact. But if you just approach it one by one and say, I'm going to do this AI model and then build the data to support that, and then I'm going to do this other AI model over here and build the data to support that, you never get any faster at innovating because each time you have to build the data for each model. But if you actually build out a foundation that can support innovation of all sorts in AI and not AI across the company, that's just going to make you so much more powerful. So you really need to invest in that foundation.
Amy, thank you so much. And hearing it from a data leader like you, and also the sentiment of wanting good data over, let's say, a good AI model, I think just hammers home the importance of good data and how you're doing it at Capital One and your journey. Amy, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your insights.
Thank you. It was fun to talk with you.
Likewise, and on behalf of Fast Company and our partner Capital One, thanks to all of you listening who joined us here today. Keep the conversation alive, rewatch, share, and thank you again for being part of this Fast Company podcast, Tech Stack, Inside the Innovation Engine. Until next time.